As they were driving into the forest for an expedition, a herd of deer suddenly burst out from the trees. Glenn instinctively swerved to avoid them, but the vehicle lost control and rolled down the hillside. Jack quickly stopped his car and rushed over with his wife, only to find Glenn's legs pinned inside the mangled vehicle. He tried pulling the door open to drag Glenn out, but the impact had jammed it shut. Even a crowbar couldn't pry it loose. Meanwhile, his wife tried calling emergency services, but for some reason, no one answered. Jack handed Glenn a pistol for protection before heading back toward town with the others to search for rescue equipment. But the moment they got back inside the car, the dog in the back seat began barking wildly at seemingly nothing. As if something was approaching, Amy's heart sank and she quickly shouted for Jack to shut all the doors. A terrifying creature suddenly slammed against the window. The dog had sensed it coming. Despite the monster's ferocity, the dog fearlessly barked at it, trying to scare it away. But more creatures were drawn in by the noise, relentlessly slamming into the car until the windows were covered in cracks. At the critical moment, a burst of gunfire rang out. Badly injured, Glenn had opened fire, drawing most of the creatures away. As the gunshots faded, Glenn was completely overwhelmed by the creatures, and the forest fell silent once again. Everyone understood that Glenn had sacrificed himself to buy them time to escape. Before they could recover from the shock, Amy's dog began barking wildly at seemingly nothing again. Realizing the creatures would return, Jack reluctantly opened the door and let the dog out, finally luring the monsters away. The windows had already been shattered in the chaos. They needed to leave immediately, but another creature was perched on a distant branch, watching. Jack signaled everyone to stay quiet, then carefully opened the car door, hoping to kill the creature before it noticed him. But just as he approached, Daisy, his mother-in-law, suffered an asthma attack and began coughing uncontrollably. Even though his wife quickly handed her an inhaler, the noise had already drawn the creature toward the car. Thinking fast, Jack picked up a crowbar and threw it into the distance, the loud crash immediately diverting the creature's attention. That confirmed Jack's suspicion. The creatures hunted purely by sound and couldn't detect prey visually. He quickly returned to the car and told everyone what he had discovered, which surprisingly gave them an advantage. Ever since Amy lost her hearing in a car accident, the family had grown used to living quietly and communicating through sign language. With creatures still lurking throughout the forest, starting the car would only attract them. Left with no other option, they abandoned the vehicle and headed on foot toward a nearby town for help. Before leaving, Jack walked over to Glenn's wrecked car. Looking at Glenn's disfigured body, he fought back his grief and set the vehicle ablaze. The deafening explosion of the car drew every nearby creature toward it, giving the group a chance to escape the forest. What they didn't realize was that the creatures attacking them had already spread throughout the city. The once crowded subway station now lay in ruins, covered in blood and mangled bodies. Inside one of the train cars, the passengers sat frozen in fear. Then a little boy began to cry, and at the thought of those monsters, every passenger immediately fixed their eyes on him. One man even rushed forward, trying to snatch the child away and throw him off the train to avoid attracting the monsters. The boy's mother desperately tried to stop him, but the surrounding passengers pinned her down without hesitation. Only when she tearfully agreed to get off the train with her son did the others finally back off. As the train doors slid open, the woman and her child were forced out. She nervously walked into the darkness, but moments later, the child began crying again, followed by a horrifying roar from the darkness. Terrified, she sprinted back toward the train with her child in her arms, but it was already too late. Amid endless screams of terror, the entire subway station became a slaughterhouse for the creatures. Meanwhile, not long after the exhausted Amy had fallen asleep, her mother rushed into the room in panic and woke her up. When she entered the living room, she found everyone gathered around the television with grim expressions. Every channel was broadcasting emergency reports about terrifying creatures suddenly attacking the entire city. The streets were littered with horrific bodies, and survivors had even uploaded footage of the monsters online. In one video, a woman and her son were trapped inside a car, desperately holding up signs warning people to stay silent. Before anyone could process it all, the news began revealing the origin of the creatures. Just days earlier, an archaeological expedition had uncovered an ancient cave never before documented. The moment they broke through the stone wall, countless creatures swarmed out of the cave. Several explorers were torn apart instantly as countless creatures swarmed out of the cave and onto the surface. Now, enormous numbers of monsters were advancing toward the city, and the government urged everyone to stay silent and wait for rescue. Moments later, the roar of aircraft thundered overhead as military helicopters swept across the sky. The sight filled Jack with unease, and he immediately decided to shut off their phones and barricade the house while waiting for help. But Glenn believed the creatures were attracted to sound, which meant the noisy city was the most dangerous place possible. Without hesitation, everyone packed their belongings and prepared to flee to the suburbs to escape the creatures. By the time they reached the highway, the city skyline was already swarming with creatures. while screams echoed everywhere. The horror of the apocalypse shattered humanity's sanity, leaving people driven only by primal survival instincts. Before long, Jack's family arrived at a gas station. But just as they prepared to refuel, a man carrying a shotgun suddenly rushed out from the shadows, with a crazed look in his eyes. The man pointed his gun at Amy and demanded that they hand over the car keys. Jack tried to calm him down, but the man had completely lost his mind and fired without hesitation. To protect his family, Jack reluctantly stepped forward, slowly preparing to hand over the car keys. As the two got closer, Glenn seized the opportunity and shot the man, while Amy's dog lunged at him. The wounded man immediately lost his arrogance and begged Jack and the others to take him with them. Jack no longer trusted a word he said. They took his shotgun and quickly drove away. The family drove for hours toward the outskirts, only to find the highway completely clogged with abandoned vehicles. Clearly, everyone had tried to flee the city at once, turning the roads into total gridlock. Glenn immediately decided to change routes, knowing that staying trapped on the highway would only attract the creatures. But once they entered the forest, Glenn's car swerved to avoid a herd of deer and rolled down the hillside. As they prepared to head back toward the city for help, the dog in the back seat began barking wildly, drawing nearby creatures. In the chaos that followed, Jack's family lost not only Glenn, but also the loyal dog that had been with them for years. There was no time to grieve, so they hurried into the woods and set out on foot toward a nearby town for shelter. As darkness fell, the exhausted group stopped on a hillside to rest. Suddenly, the sun spotted a cabin at the foot of the hill, and everyone eagerly headed toward it. But upon reaching the cabin, they noticed faint lights glowing around it, clearly indicating someone was still inside. Jack cautiously stepped forward to ask for help, but a bell on the fence suddenly rang, and a creature immediately lunged at them. Terrified, they dropped to the ground in silence while the cabin's owner emerged with a shotgun and warned them to leave immediately. Before she could finish, several creatures burst out of the darkness and overwhelmed her. Within minutes, the old woman's screams faded away, leaving only the creature's snarls behind. To enter the cabin safely, they avoided the front door and instead headed toward a nearby drainage pipe. Jack carefully crawled inside to scout ahead, unaware that a rattlesnake was hidden within the pipe. After thoroughly checking the cabin and confirming it was safe, he signaled for his family to come through one by one. But when the son crawled into the pipe, he accidentally startled the rattlesnake, which immediately rattled its tail and struck at him. At the critical moment, one of the creatures was drawn to the rattling and pounced on the snake, tearing it apart. At the same time, more creatures charged toward the drainage pipe, and one bit deeply into the wife's thigh. Realizing the screams would attract even more monsters, Jack quickly switched on the wood chipper in the yard. The deafening roar attracted every nearby creature, and they hurled themselves straight into the spinning blades of the wood chipper. Although the immediate danger had passed, her thigh had been horribly mangled. Fortunately, Daisy found some alcohol and cotton in the cabin, and as a nurse, she quickly treated Amy's wound. But by the next day, the injury showed no signs of improving and had already become infected. Without antibiotics, she might not survive much longer. Determined to save her, Jack took Amy to a nearby town to try their luck finding medicine. They carefully entered the town, where the streets lay silent and littered with mutilated corpses, while creatures slept atop the power lines overhead. They moved as quietly as possible, knowing that even the slightest sound would bring the monsters swarming toward them. Before long, they found a pharmacy, unaware that a cold-eyed man nearby was watching them intently. Inside, the pharmacy was in complete disarray, filled with bodies torn apart by the creatures and a suffocating stench of decay. They didn't dare stay and quickly searched the shelves for antibiotics, while the man once again watched them through a crack in the doorway. Amy suddenly noticed something writhing beneath a rag, only to uncover dozens of creature eggs. The hatchlings inside were nearly fully developed, and the eggs covered almost every corner of the pharmacy. Suddenly, one of the hatchlings burst through its shell, causing Amy to let out an involuntary scream. The sound immediately drew 3 creatures into the store. Perched on the shelves, they listened carefully for movement while Amy and Jack held their breath, frozen in place. Amy soon noticed the smoke detector above them and realized they could use its alarm to create a distraction. She quickly explained her plan to Jack through sign language and handed him a nearby mop. Jack lit the mop with a lighter and raised it toward the ceiling, instantly triggering the piercing alarm. The creatures were drawn to the noise but couldn't pinpoint their exact location, crashing wildly into the surroundings instead. Taking advantage of the moment, Jack and Amy slipped out of the pharmacy, only to be stopped on the street by the mysterious man. He raised his hands to show he meant no harm, but Jack and Amy were desperate to return and treat the wife and refused to deal with him. As they prepared to leave, the man revealed he was a priest and invited them to join his silent faith. Even though the group claimed to help people survive the apocalypse, Jack and Amy still felt uneasy and turned him down, but neither of them noticed that the priest had no tongue inside his mouth. Fortunately, they returned in time, and with the antibiotics, the wife's condition slowly stabilized. Amy also found information online revealing that the creatures were extremely vulnerable to cold temperatures. At this point, nearly the entire world, except for the coldest regions, had already been overrun by the creatures. As long as they could make it to the freezing northern regions, they might finally escape the terrifying creatures for good. Before they could begin heading north, the priest returned with several of his followers. Seeing the unsettling smiles on their faces, Jack quickly told his family to stay inside while he went out alone to confront them. No matter how firmly Jack refused to join the church, the priest still refused to give up trying to persuade him. He even turned his attention to Amy, claiming she could carry on the last hope of humanity. Those disturbing words instantly enraged Jack, who stormed back inside and returned with a shotgun to force them away. The priest assumed Jack wouldn't dare pull the trigger and started moving toward the house, but he underestimated how far Jack would go to protect his family. Seeing Jack's unwavering determination, the priest did not dare step forward any further, leaving a bitter threat before turning away. That night, a clap of thunder jolted Jack awake. Thinking the priest had returned, he quickly woke the rest of the family. But when they pulled back the curtains, they found only a young girl outside. After confirming she was alone, they pulled her inside. As they tried to ask her what had happened, they noticed her body was covered in bruises, and that the cult had even mutilated her so she could no longer speak. The horrific sight immediately made Jack suspicious. He ripped open the girl's coat and discovered dozens of cell phones strapped to her body. At the same time, Amy upstairs spotted another phone on the window, and suddenly a loud alarm went off. A creature was instantly drawn to the noise, and before anyone could react, the phone strapped to the girl also began ringing loudly. Countless creatures rushed out of the darkness surrounding the cabin, and several even smashed through the windows and broke inside. Jack quickly ripped the phones off the girl and threw them into the water, and only then did the creatures outside gradually stop attacking. But before they could catch their breath, one of the cult members threw another phone through the window. The creatures immediately went berserk again. Jack quickly sent his family into the basement while he and his son boarded up the broken windows. During the chaos, several cult members slipped inside and forcibly abducted Amy. Jack's wife rushed at them with a hammer but was kicked to the ground. Daisy immediately chased after them, grabbing two cult members tightly and signaling Amy to escape. Another cultist tried to go after Amy, but Daisy grabbed his legs tightly and stopped him. Realizing she couldn't hold on much longer, she let out a piercing scream, sacrificing herself and taking all three cult members down with her. Before Amy could even process what had happened, the priest emerged from the shadows again with his followers and recaptured her, mockingly pressing a finger to his lips at Jack. As he watched his daughter being dragged away, Jack suddenly realized that the thunder and heavy rain had thrown the creatures off their sense of direction. Taking advantage of the thunder as cover, he rushed at the priest and knocked him to the ground with a single punch. Despite her injuries, his wife picked up an axe and struck one of the cult members, rescuing Amy. Meanwhile, Jack's fight with the priest had reached a brutal peak, and the priest seized an opening to stab him with a knife. Driven by the need to protect his family, Jack fought through the pain and charged at the priest again, repeatedly striking him with the butt of his rifle. He didn't stop until the priest finally went still, a moment that left the girl watching from a distance in absolute terror. But realizing she was also a victim of the disaster, Jack chose to spare her and turned back toward the cabin. Soon they set out on the run again, and after days of exhausting travel, they finally reached a northern refuge. The creatures continued to evolve, and humanity's struggle for survival never stopped. There are no clear answers in the apocalypse, but even in extreme fear and despair, there are always those who fight back with love.